Good evening to everyone in person here in New York City and on Zoom from the Long Island campus. I am Maria Perbellini. I'm the Dean of the School of Architecture and Design at New York Tech. And we are thrilled to have Pascale Sablan as tonight's distinguished guest speaker for our student-led event. Pascale is the Chief Executive Officer of Adjaye Associates in New York, where she leads the office and implementing a transformative vision contributes significantly to major international projects. An accomplished architect and activist, she founded Beyond the Built Environment, a nonprofit organization that celebrates the contributions of diverse designers and advocates for equitable built environments and communities. She stands out as the 315 living African American woman registered architect in the US, embodying excellence, innovation, and sustainability in her practice. Inducted into the prestigious AIA College of Fellows, she's the youngest African American to receive this honor in its 167-year history. Congratulations, this is really impressive. As the global president of the National Organization of Minority Architects, she's the fifth woman to hold this position in the organization's 52-year legacy. Pascale has earned prominent recognition, including the Architectural League 2021 Emerging Voices Award and the 2021 AIA Whitney M. Young Jr. Award. She has received grants from the Graham Foundation and the Architects Foundation for her research and exhibitions. With a Bachelor of Architecture from Pratt Institute and a Master of Science from Columbia University, Pascale's work has been featured in the New York Times, NPR, and Forbes, and recognized by OFRA's Future Rising platform. Pascale today will highlight the importance of representation, documentation, and acknowledgement to empower women and people of color in the design and architecture professions. An open discussion within the large framework of injustice will also be part, I hope, of the conversation. Before we invite Pascale to the stage, I would like to also welcome our wonderful students. And we have here Elise Park, president of the NOMAS at New York Tech, Long Island campus, and a fourth-year BArch student will introduce Pascale, right? That's what I understood later on. And we also have Sherrell Rabsatt, also part of NOMA's leadership at New York Tech, and she will moderate the Q&A session following the lecture. Associate Dean for Student Success and Engagement, Anthony Caradonna, will now speak briefly about the student leading this event, and I would like to invite Anthony to join me on stage. Thank you.
Good evening.
Good evening.
Thank you, Dean Perbellini, for the transformative leadership you advocate here at the SOAD at NYT and for the ever-expanding, proactive, and forward-thinking initiatives you develop and bring to our school and students and faculty, like the dynamic list of annual lectures and events series that you develop with our faculty, which include tonight's special NOMAS hosted lecture. I would like to introduce our outstanding student leaders hosting tonight's NOMAS keynote lecture, who have also served with me on the SOAD's Student Affairs Committee, which is chaired by Professor Dong-Se Kim. Elise Park, who will introduce tonight's distinguished speaker, Pascale Sablan, is a fourth-year Bachelor of Architecture student. Elise has held multiple student leadership positions in both NOMAS and the AIAS before spearheading the founding of the NOMAS Long Island chapter and subsequently serving as the current NOMAS chapter president. She was nominated to the 2023 NOMA Future Faces Fellowship Cohort, a select group of national leaders whose fellowship is dedicated to advancing minority presence and licensure in the professional workforce, while contributing to critical research at top professional offices and firms. Elise is a passionate emerging urban design researcher and design advocate, invested in affordable housing futures and equitable communities. Tonight's Q&A moderator, Sherrell Rabsatt, is also a dynamic leader in the SOAD's NOMA's chapter who channels her dual passions for creativity and mental health advocacy through her flair for coordinating the club's initiatives, interactive events, and activities which engage members and foster an inclusive and positive spirit of shared community. Sherrell is deeply committed to raising awareness about mental health within and beyond the demanding field of architecture. She strives to foster open, borderless dialogue in order to advocate for and destigmatize mental health challenges and bias, and nurture communities to promote self-care within and beyond the NOMA's community. Sherrell Rabsatt personifies a personal vision where creativity and well-being are interwoven and fused, inspiring others to prioritize mental health through the transformational pursuit of their passions. Finally, on a personal note, I pause to celebrate Pascale Sablan, whose stellar path began at Pratt Institute, where I served as her fourth-year design instructor in New York and her fourth-year Rome program coordinator and faculty in the spring. Pascale's rising arc of excellence is no surprise to me. Her innate exemplary design talents, her bright, charming, positive, outgoing personality and attitude, which we all already experienced tonight, combine in fueling her energy for serving, developing, and advocating for professional equity, community leadership, and cultural transformation on a national and global level. Thank you, Pascale, for joining us, and we are very proud of you and honored to host you at NYT School of Architecture and Design. And Elise, please now join me up on the podium. Thank you.
Hi. So my name is Elise Park. I'm the current NOMAS Long Island president and founding member of the chapter on the Old Westbury campus. I'm so honored and excited to welcome and introduce Pascale Sablan, one of my biggest role models and a true inspiration to our NOMAS chapter and members. When we first began our NOMAS chapter, it was really important for me to be able to highlight the voices, stories, and projects of minority architects and designers. Our board decided to dedicate a week in each minority month to highlight 5 amazing architects and showcase their work and ideas. I stumbled upon Pascale and her change-making work while researching with my executive board in the first year for Black History Month, and ever since then, I have been the biggest fan and advocate for Pascale and her work. In January 2022, I stumbled upon a call for NOMAS and AIS students to apply for an opportunity to research and compile information uplifting the 140 African-American AIE fellows for an exhibition of Say It Loud in Washington, D.C. I had been in awe of Beyond the Built Environment's work and the Say It Loud exhibitions that were being showcased around the country, and to work with Pascale was, of course, an amazing opportunity. I was initially so nervous to work with someone I admired so greatly, but Pascale immediately made me feel so heard and important and was such a genuine and passionate mentor and friend throughout our months of research. Fast forward to the following October, our NOMA chapter attended our first NOMA conference in Nashville and heard Pascale give a speech uplifting minority architects' experiences and urging us to make our voices heard. Everyone was in such awe of what a dynamic and powerful speaker and person Pascale is. Her words left such an impact on us and helped us gain a renewed sense of purpose and intent upon returning to New York. All this to say, I'm so excited for you all to listen to Pascale's story. She is one of the most amazing people and architects you will ever meet, and it is an absolute privilege to introduce her to you all. I can't wait for you all to gain the same energy and passion she left with me and all my NOMAS members with. So thank you, I'm really excited.
All right, good evening. Good evening. So I set a timer so that I know that I'll hit the proper time so that we'll have an opportunity to talk with one another. So please do not be shy. I want to hear all the questions. Also, this is a moment to kind of share my process and what I'm working through. This is not perfect. So if you have ideas, ways that we can improve, I am all here for it and want to hear all that you have to offer. So I'm looking for tonight to be more of a conversation than a lecture, but I promise I'm going to share a little bit of my story, and hopefully some of it aligns with you, some of it sparks something different in you, and it empowers you for the next steps that you're taking in your career. Ooh, how do I do next? Oh, it's fancy. It's tucked in. See him saying it's tucked in. Thank you. I got it. Thank you, my love. So as these very generous bios, I'm going to try my best not to disappoint today, talked about all the various hats that I wear on this very curly head of mine. And part of that is participating in NOMA. And NOMA has been such a huge part of my professional trajectory that I want to give a lot of glory to that support system in that community. And so when one of my favorite programs is Project Pipeline, where we introduce architecture to kids, we walk around the community, we empower them with the vernacular, and then they're sketching, and then they talk about how they're going to be an architect. And as they're skipping out the door, telling their parents that that's what they're going to be, I wondered what happens when they continue their research about what a great architect would be. And so as a millennial, I Googled it, right? And in doing so, Google comes up with a Google banner of 50 names and faces. Here are the first 40. By a raise of hands, how many of you know at least all 40? Yeah, you would. All right, 30, 20. All right, yeah, that's about where I'm at. 10. Yeah, so this list, I was like, wow, what a range from, contemporary, currently practicing architects all the way to Raphael and Michelangelo. Like, this is a very long breadth of time. So of this list of great architects, how many are women? So between now and when Architects with Ninja Turtles, there's only been 2 women who have been great architects. Is that accurate? Absolutely not, right? And so that was the first thing. And then also thinking about how many Black African-American architects are also represented. So this made me angry. So here's a powerful print screen moment for those who are on Zoom, where these are 40 amazing Black and brown architects for you to know and consider who's changed your built environment. And so being the audacious Pascale that I am, I went to Google's headquarters, met with them and said, why? Why is this the result of the search? And they said, Pascale, because there's not enough content that lists you all is great. Let Vanessa in. I'm just gonna let people in. I hope that's okay. They said there's not enough content out there that actually lists you all as great. Ooh, now I'm messing around. So follow that discussion and that conversation, because I was ready, but I wasn't ready for that answer particularly. I listened to a speech by Dr. Adjaye Sanford, who talks about Afrocentric education as a human right. And she introduced me to an important figure named Albert Shanker. And he was the president of the Federation of Teachers from 1964 to 97. And his idea was creating equity in education for public schools. So whether you're in public school in New York or in California, your education was comparable. But part of his process was about purging people's identity. Teach teachers not to keep history, never let the African-American child learn of his or her history, because if they do, they'll relate more to their ethnicity and they will not become an American. And so the premise of her speech was that our education system is sometimes still flawed with this same mindset, where the identity of those who are participating in a meaningful way is one that we're not taught about. So how I set up this presentation tonight, so that's not super depressing, is that the black and white pages show you like some of the critical issues. The yellow pages is what I've been doing personally, specifically to address it. And then cyan, my favorite color, is what I'm attempting to do, continuing to work towards. And that's the first lesson of this evening, which is you don't have to solve it. You ain't got to figure it all out to share it. Sharing it with your community could be the first opportunity for you to get more support and more power in terms of making your work come together. So way back in the day, in 2017, I hosted our first Say It Loud exhibition. Say It Loud as inspired by the James Brown song. But the concept for this exhibition was to see our faces, hear our voices, and feel our impact within the colorful tapestry of our heritage. And so to do that, I wanted to showcase our work. And the thumbnails and labels for each of the projects had gigantic headshots so that you can equate what we look like with our name and with our work. And I wanted our voice to be participating in the exhibition. So on the magenta walls, I had video testimonials of these diverse designers speaking about their experience in the built environment. So I wanted this exhibition to be bright, vibrant, loud, if you will. And then someone from the United Nations actually saw that exhibition and invited us to showcase it in the visitor center. And they had more restrictions in terms of how bright and vibrant I could be. However, one can argue it was equally as loud, that they had so many visitors that come. Over 7,000, I believe, visitors were able to see the exhibition at the time that it was up. And we were able to create these beautiful boards, but they gave me the power of the podium. They said, you get a little 2-minute speech. And so I used those 2 minutes to thank them for allowing me to do this exhibition, but also talk about the mission and the work that we're trying to do and ask, like, can they help as world leaders make this a national movement? And then in 2018 was the AIA conference in New York, and it was happening at the Javits Center. And I had submitted 2 panels for discussion, and they both got rejected. Obviously the subject matter was focusing on women and BIPOC designers, and the response was that they wanted content that was more inviting to a larger audience so that more people would participate. I appreciated the no, but I didn't stand for it. So realizing that the Javits Center was only 1 block away from my office at the time, I asked my office if I could take over the gallery and the conference room for those days. And they said, sure, Pascale, absolutely. I then called the UN. I was like, are you guys done with those boards? And they said, yeah, we're done. I was like, can I get them? Sure, come get them. Absolutely. Then I called NICOBA and the AIA Diversity Committee and said, hey, can we get a word out to have these 2 panels in my office at this conference center with the exhibition behind us? And they said, sure, whatever you need. And then lastly, I called AIA conference. I was like, can we put my exhibition on the app so people know that they can come and visit and participate? And they said, absolutely. So even though I started with a no, I squeezed it until I got my yes out of there and was able to have the exhibition there. And what you're seeing in one of those photos is one of those panel discussions that was actually fully attended and was participating in that way. And so when I sat down from the UN moment where I got to take the podium for a little bit, before I sat down, they said, Pascale, we'll help make it a global movement. So for a year, we translated the Say It Loud exhibitions into 8 different languages. And that's how you say it loud in those languages down the center of the screen there. And then they had March 25th, 2019 is Say It Loud Day. And the UN information centers worldwide had these exhibitions on display in all the languages that participated. And they invited professors and students to come see the work. So I was getting messages and tagged and things from all over the world, places I still to this day can't pronounce. I was just so hyped and excited to know that this really small idea about having this exhibition in New York had turned into this global movement. But this is also when I thought to myself, man, these 20 designers that I had featured in the first one, they've gotten a lot of play here. They've been in a lot of spaces. So this is the moment where it turned into a traveling exhibition, into a traveling activation. And then since I got squeezed out my yes the year prior in 2019, I was officially invited to participate at AIA, have my own exhibition. They put me by the charging station where all the snacks was at. So really popular. It was incredible. So it was really great to see that once I was able to prove my concept of the importance of the work that I was doing, that it became an automatic kind of invitation for me to continue to partner in that way, and was able to feature 58 diverse designers in this exhibition. And the president, Bill Bates, was able to come hang out with us and make it a point to say it loud. I then leveraged these opportunities for public speaking to also ask for exhibitions. So when I was invited to do the Architecture Exchange East Conference, and spoke to an audience of 750 people, I totally broke my foot. So I was, walking around with my boot, but leverage it as an opportunity to have a Say It Loud Virginia exhibition that be part of it. And so that was another way of pushing that forward. So I was happy to elevate the work of women and diverse designers of Virginia. Also in November, I did Pennsylvania. And this one was a powerful one. One of these lectures, somebody in the audience said, Pascale, if the whole point of all of this was to inspire those little kids who are skipping out of those project pipeline camps, how are they going to find you at South by Southwest and Center for Architecture and conferences? I get in the UN, how are you connecting to the audience you originally was setting out to reach? And I so appreciated that reflection, because as I was trying to move in a way that showed a level of accountability and a level of prestige so that people would take the exhibition seriously, I ventured away from the mission at hand. And so when I shared the feedback with NOMA PGH, they said, got you, P. So they picked a venue that was a public gallery that was open at nights and on weekends. And then they programmed it like you wouldn't believe. Panel discussions, networking events, a youth day where kids had to come around, look at the projects on the wall, and then build it with Legos or Connects, replicas of the projects that they saw. So I say all that to say it became one of the requirements then, was finding ways of connecting with the community for having these exhibitions. And then Say It Loud Georgia. So Say It Loud Georgia was the very first school of architecture that allowed me to do a Say It Loud exhibition. They were not the very first that I asked. So it was such a big deal when I finally got a school that acknowledged the importance of what we were doing. And what was profound is I was able to also elevate architects that had built part of their campus that students didn't even know about existed as well. And that's Bill Stanley III and his wife, Avenue Love Stanley. That's at the bottom of your screen. So it was also really dope to have the lecture series, but also be able to have the exhibition up and celebrate the amazing work of our Georgia designers. Then in February of 2020, we did Say It Loud UK. That one I was invited by the Royal Institute of British Architects to allow us to have a Say It Loud. What I learned there is that some of the issues that we're challenged with here are actually similar in other countries, right? It's not just a US only issue, it's definitely a global challenge. And so being able to connect with all these international talents was also important. And I realized I couldn't lean on my reputation anymore. People were like, who are you? Why am I submitting for this? And so trying to really connect with that community in the audience there to submit was a great idea and a great experience. Then March 2020, Say It Loud Ohio. This was dope, y'all. We had Caramoo House Theater, which is the oldest African-American theater in the country. I totally thought it was the Apollo, but Apollo was whites only for a long time. Who knew? And they were gonna have all these plays, and when people came out for the intermissions, they would be able to see our exhibit. We worked on this thing for 6 months, had 44 designers and 32 video testimonials, which is obscene. It was amazing. And then 2 hours before the opening, the governor got on the TV and said, hey, y'all, there's something called COVID. No more gatherings of more than 90 people. And so only the people who were actually in the exhibit, who had come for the prep and setup, actually got to see the exhibition. Oh, devastation, y'all, devastation. And in that moment, I realized in this advocacy work, how was I going to be able to continue moving the mission forward, which depended so much on me participating in person and having these in-person events. How does it work in now a new virtual world? So Say It Loud, Tennessee. So they contacted me in the realm of all the other people who were calling me to say, never mind, we can't do it, and said, oh yeah, we still want to push forward. And I was like, I don't know if you know about this pandemic. And they said, yeah. But Pascale, you always put the exhibitions on your website afterwards. So what if we started the reverse? We put all the content on the website first, and then when it's safe, we'll pick a physical venue to have the exhibition. So all this time I had all the work that I needed to make it come to fruition and was able to just think about it in a different perspective and was able to move it forward. So Say It Loud, Tennessee was my first virtual exhibition where you're able to see a collage of all the designers that were featured. And then when you click one of the thumbnails, it takes you to their profile page that shows you a little bit more of their answers, their headshots, video testimonials that they submitted, and more detailed information about the project. And then in October of 2021, I was invited by the Kent State University to have my Say It Louder Ohio exhibit. So what we did is we had the Caramoo Theater ship over the boards to this new place, and we were able to put it, arrange it in their gallery. Again, part of their lecture series was part of like my request, and a collaboration with AIA Cleveland and the Women in Architecture group. So I say all that to say it was powerful and dynamic because with the AIA Say It Loud New York exhibition, I originally did vinyl on the wall. So once the exhibition was done, it was pretty much trash. And I didn't like the waste of it. So I converted my exhibitions to be on boards. I got it. Okay, thank you. On boards. And so when I did that, it allowed for that to move. And so part of my naming convention was Say It Louder was just to say that the boards were now moving around. And so this was really exciting to see. And then I got another school of architecture, the Knowlton School of Architecture in Ohio, to also approve having the exhibition. So those same boards that started at Caramoo moved here, moved there, and then also moved to a high school. So these boards have been traveling. And since it's all digital, if something gets damaged, dented, or, spelling error, all we had to do was just reprint that board. And so it was really powerful to see if the first group paid for the outset of the development, that it then became this beautiful resource that moved around. Then Say It Loud NOMA 50th. This is when I got fancy with technology. I've used QR codes. So then now you can actually scan the QR codes from the labels of each of the people and able to learn way more about them. And it was a time where I won a few awards, and I told them for my documentary, they had to film it at the Say It Loud NOMA exhibition because it was like the culmination of all these different passions and things and efforts that I was doing. Then Say It Loud Texas was the first time a exhibition organization team asked me to focus on a particular group. So this was women only, so that's why it's called WIA. And they were able to pull forward 91 diverse designers. And this is, again, a self-submitting process. So each woman kind of submitted their work and was able to feature them. And that was really powerful and the most we had ever received in terms of submissions, and 49 videos. Then it immediately started to travel, and then it went into San Antonio in its Center for Architecture. And then I got another School of Architecture in Minnesota, which was dope and nice. Then Maryland, their Center for Architecture opened, and they wanted this to be their very first exhibition that was featured there. So we also worked again through COVID and making sure that we're able to feature and elevate people and find unique ways of telling the story. North Carolina almost killed me. I'm not gonna lie to you, because they had 148 people submit, and they wanted to do 2 locations simultaneously, Raleigh and Charlotte at the same time. So we're developing the boards, printing them and installing them, and having programming that then supports them. And then Say It Loud NARM Melbourne, which was the last inhabitable continent to have a Say It Loud. So now world domination is upon us. We have now had a Say It Loud exhibition everywhere where people live, and was able to, again, elevate the work and contributions of 111 diverse designers of Australia, and really was able to feature it in a way that was pretty powerful and dynamic. Say It Loud Dallas with the WIA boards, again, traveling, and as it travels, it gained more and more specific to that location, people being featured. And then one of my favorites is Say It Loud Washington, D.C. So this is the first time where it was on me to come up with the content. As we talked about before, it's always been a self-submitting process. Here, I won a grant, but part of the requirement of this grant was that we had to make it more general and not just DC specific. So we found a balance where I asked the AIA, can we do an exhibition on the 140 African-American Arch Fellows ever? And they said, absolutely. I was like, cool, can I get the list? And they're like, we ain't got that. So first I had to dive into NOMA to see if they had it from the historian standpoint, and they did. And then I put out a call for amazing researchers across the country. One of the superstars is in the room right now, Elise Park, and like really excited to do this work. And what was challenging is it wasn't just a matter of Googling these people, because a lot of them were just not out there publicly. So it was calling past companies, business owners, family members to get it. And we made a commitment that all 140 would have headshots and project images. There was no one that was just going to be like a little black shadow. We had to figure it out. And it took us a few months to do it, but we ultimately was able to accommodate that. But then also, since the mission was about elevating those who are local to their communities, I used one of the galleries to do a specific Washington, D.C. designers, and that's the purple boards you're seeing there. And so we were able to showcase in total 158 diverse designers in the space. Say It Loud Nebraska, I think, was really powerful. They came up with the brilliant idea, I take no credit, for using a shipping container as the exhibition output, and was able to have ceilings donated, flooring donated, TVs donated, and created this incredible exhibition. And I just thought it was so dope because it was put in public plazas. And then they identified different plazas throughout all of Nebraska. So it's like on Say It Louder #6. I can't even track it all anymore. But watching videos of the truck loading it and unloading it and dumping it in parking lots is like hilarious to me. So I say all this to say this small idea about having these exhibitions has really transformed in how people perceive it and make it their own. Last year we were in Michigan. So we did that in their School of Architecture as well. Whew, Say It Loud South Dakota, that was in October of last year. That was also fun times, paired with lectures and participating in that space and actually having it be part of their museum exhibitions. And so with all of that, what's the goal? My idea is twofold. The first is to publish a series of kids' books that are location specific and would have caricatures of the architect and their work and pop up. So they could have the words, I can too be an architect, I can too change the world. The second thing is Legos. So I love the architecture product line for Legos. So dope. You get this booklet, you get pictures, images, a lot of information and content. But I was really frustrated that in all of their product line, nothing was designed by women or people of color. So I was able to finagle a lecture at the Lego headquarters March of last year, where I was given the mic. And so with that, I said, hey, here are some projects for y'all to consider for your product line, because it can't just be one, like we need more than one. So I gave them ideas of different projects at different typologies with different backgrounds so that they can see that there is beautiful, stunning work that deserved that same level of recognition. But I didn't just do 4, I did a whole 8 because I wasn't playing around for real, and really wanted to make sure that they understood the importance of what I was asking for and the gravity and how attainable it is to do. And then while I was there, I was like, well, while we're talking about it, your cities collection, super dope, but you have nothing on the continent of Africa. So here are 2 distinct skylines that you can participate in. And then while we're here, let's do monuments too. So I really tried to sit there and push it forward and made really great progress. And they want to bring me in as a consultant to advise on products for them to bring on. And the goal, the wish, and what I'm working on, which should kind of get a cyan page, is NOMA branded Lego box, so that for these that goes out, and then NOMA would get a royalties. I'm learning new money words now, y'all. Royalties would go back to NOMA and moving its mission forward. So continuing to push that forward, and it's been going pretty well. And so now the namesake, why did I call this lecture tonight? I was asked to stand, and it was because of an experience that I had back at Pratt. In the School of Architecture, there was an architecture history class where a professor asked 2 of us to stand up. Myself and the other person stood, and he said, okay, these 2 will never become architects because they're Black and because they're women. And I was surprised that a professor who didn't know my name nor my capacity would say something that way, that bold. The other thing I was surprised that man, in this entire classroom, there's only 2 of us that hit that criteria. And then lastly, just the acceptance of my peers hearing that. And so when I sat down, the person to my left, I'll never forget him, Simon C., said, you better not let that stop you. Prove him wrong. Way more colorful words, I had to edit, but you get what he was saying. And as a very competitive person, that was the sentence I needed to hear to continue to persevere. At the same time, though, that was the first time I realized my gender and identity and my ethnicity was such a big part of my presence and my impact. And so therefore, the responsibility of needing to show up and show out was critical. Even if I wasn't feeling good, no, I can't be the Black girl who doesn't show up to class, because I don't want the way that I perform to be the reason why opportunities are limited. It had to be the reason why they were multiplied. And so that burden, that stress, that heaviness is something that I carried, that I can't just study here to become an architect. I actually have to also change the profession while I'm at it. So I'm proud of that moment because it gave me purpose. And so when I give this lecture, I typically ask people in the audience to stand up if they've ever been told that they're inadequate because of their gender and race. And I'm going to do that tonight. So if you've ever been given that feedback, can you please stand? Wow. Now look how talented and amazing and brilliant you are. And I'm so proud of you all for persevering and being here and standing up for what's right. Please sit. And I share this to say, because when I tell this story, people are always shocked by it, but I want to emphasize how common this is. And to tell you that you have a resource and a community that's there to fight for you, and to tell you that you are not alone, that you are more than enough to be brilliant and to change the world through architecture and design. So thank you so much for your bravery. So I thought about this professor. I mean, I try not to think about him too much, but I thought about, like, why did he feel so empowered to say these things? And I thought about maybe that was what his experience were. So I started to look at NCARB's research in terms of the demographics of students that apply to schools of architecture. And typically 5% apply, 5% get enrolled, but only 3% graduate. And there's the kind of gender breakdown between the two. And it's been stuck at about 5% for nearly a decade. I also thought about the demographics of my professors. 34% were licensed, 2.5% were Black, 32% were women. Am I saying that I can only learn from Black women professors? No, obviously not. However, as important it is for me to see myself represented on as a teacher or professor, so it was the same from my peers and also the other professors to see us in these spaces. So how do we multiply our existence and our experiences in these spaces, like coming to lectures, participating in crits, and being present in the process and not just necessarily becoming a professor, although we want that too. And then we have the Directory of African-American Architects. I fundamentally challenge the idea that you can't manage what you don't measure. So as we keep talking about making the profession more diverse, okay, how are we doing? How are we doing year over year? What are the sectors that we're having the most challenges with? So the directory that was started by Bradford C. Grant and Dennis Mann was the way that we were tracking and trending. And that's how I actually know that I'm the 315th and that there's exactly 614 African-American women architects registered in the US at this moment. And so the directory was once maintained by the University of Cincinnati. And in January of 2020, they decided to defund the page and no longer saw it to be important or necessary. So I'm very proud of NOMA for taking it over and maintaining it. So that's where we are right now. Currently, there are 2,571 African-American architects registered in this country. And we're working with the AIA and the LFRT to double that number to 5,000 by the year 2030. I also try to be as present as possible, participate in lectures, as I mentioned, but also started the NOMA Vimeo page where I have lectures, over 95 lectures and videos there. Because, you know, we could talk about things other than DEI stuff. So if you're looking for projects, other things, this is a really great free resource and tool that you can go hang out and check out. The Smithsonian in DC tagged it as one of the most important resources for the School of Architecture or architecture. So we have something insane like 38,000 views from that foot traffic that is hyperlinked from their website. So I say all that to say, if you're looking for content about from diverse designers, this is another great Vimeo resource for you to leverage. And then also making it right. So coming back as the New York president of NOMA, I actually went back to Pratt and said, hey, let's do a young designers conference that is focused on the youth of this community and invite them to understand what architecture is, do a design competition and challenge, and invite college kids to come here and help support. And so what I found was important was that instead of kids asking me what my process was when I graduated like a million years ago, they were able to ask their peers, these college kids, and ask the process there. So we had 58 students, 25 speakers, which was dope, and I'm so proud of it. And then we also had programs like Crafting the Interview, where we did mock interviews, portfolio reviews, and had panels with those who are in charge of hiring so that we can, again, position our membership to be able to not only find a job, but find amazing career paths so that they can excel in this profession. I then started to leverage social media for social change. So I created the Beyond the Built IG takeover page in December of 2018. And every week, a new diverse designer takes it over. And the importance of that is, again, showcasing people's stories, showing their process, that their pathways are very different. And it's constantly growing. So if you're not following it, please follow it. And if you want to be featured on it, please send us a DM. We'd love to feature you. And then the library. So you know when Google was like, hey, there's not enough content, that list you all is great. So I launched the Great Diverse Designers Library. And in that process, we were able to be the repository for every exhibition. So we have 1,112 people profiled currently on the site. And so each page kind of looks like this, where you have the images of the actual exhibitions and then thumbnails of all those who were featured. And then those are all the virtual exhibitions, so that I actually took the time in May of 2020 to convert all of our past exhibitions into these as well, virtual ones. So literally from the convenience of your home, you can explore the entire library and seeing all the different exhibitions in all these different spaces. And then I know, because architects, we love a good competition, we created the People's Choice competition. And this way, when people come visit, they have to kind of pick their favorite. And when doing that, we are able to give that winner of that exhibition a beautiful trophy, a pin, certificates, and so on and so forth. And what's been powerful is that it's extended the reach of these exhibitions. So I might have an exhibition where we have 1,000 people show up, but then the People's Choice is 6,000 votes, because, you know, you send it to your mama, your best friend, and the cousin and say, hey, vote for me. And so it's been able to virtually expand the reach of the exhibitions as well. And so with all this glorious content and all these exhibitions, I always waited for someone to invite me to do a say aloud. I never kicked in the door and said, hey, you need one of these. But in 2020, I got a lot more bolder and a lot more aggressive about where we are. And so what you're seeing in the 2024 maps is all the places that are featured and represented in the library, both globally and internationally. So we're 70% of the US and 20% of the world. And with all that content, I'm actually publishing a book called Greatness, Diverse Designers of Architecture, partnering with Oro, which is a really great publisher who's committed to having everyone who works on the book to also be a woman or person of color. And that is actually set to release in October of this year at the NOMA conference. Super hyped. It's killing me, but it's going to be amazing. And it's basically showcasing the best of the library to show, again, our work in a way that is accessible. Very good for the schools of architecture to also have in their library and part of their curriculum. And then so also wanted to share the next section, which is our answers are our heroes, and we are their legacy. So what's stopping us in this process, right? So part of it is understanding the process of becoming a licensed architect. So I'm being very, very honest here. According to NAB, it could take between 11 years to 12.5 years to become an architect. That's me at the bottom. It took me a whole 13 years to figure it out. I did my 5-year bachelor's degree, my 1-year master's. I knocked out my IDP/AXP pretty quickly. But those ARE exams, like me and them, we just did not get along. And so it took me 14 tests to pass the 7 that was required. And at the time when I was taking it, if you failed, you had to wait 6 months before you could take it again. And you had to wait 6 weeks before you found out whether you passed or failed. And so I was taking exams and failing them and not knowing as I was continuing on. So I say all this to say, most of my tears, this is the kind of sector of my life where I squeezed out most of them out of my eyes. But I was determined to persevere to be able to say that I am an architect. But really just understanding from the time you graduate high school to the time that you can say that about yourself is a very long commitment. What's another deterrent? Well, let's talk about how much it costs. To study architecture is a privilege. Let's be clear. And so again, being very honest here, according to NAB, it can cost between $40,000 to $232,000 to become an architect. That's me at the bottom at $67,000, which I thought was ridiculous. As me and Sally Mae, aka Naviant, are best friends now. We locked in for 30 years. That I have a 7-year-old child and he will be attending college and I'll still be paying back my student loans, but I digress. But then my siblings started graduating a few years after me and their numbers were starting at 6 figures. So in debt, just coming out. So just realizing the financial investment that people will be making to get their degrees, also something to be mindful. Now, for those students in the room who don't know this, I'm so sorry to be the face to bring the bad news, and I appreciate you and I love you and I'm so sorry, but here's some honesty. We ain't gonna be coming out making mad money. So when you think about other comparable professions like lawyers and doctors who come out and they're making $100,000, we come out more or less making about $50,000, depending on where you are in the country and where the economy is doing. And so after creating that huge financial investment and that time investment, this is also something that deters a lot of people from this process. And then lastly, I want to talk about just the negative representation of the profession. That in a lot of communities, architects are the supervillain, right? And it's not a misconception, but an actual depiction of the relationship that we've cultivated with socioeconomically challenged communities and those who are not cutting the check. So when I talk about architecture, we have to understand how we integrate and how do we interact with our community members is really important. That those who are our clients is not just the person we have the contract with, but all those who are impacted by our work. And so just thinking about that, how do we then start to solve the issue of creating more diversity as it relates to architecture? Because it's not just a matter of putting us in a place, but having a just and equitable experience when we're in those spaces. In addition to creating all these spaces of elevating us, I also had to get very familiar with fighting the force of erasure. For some time, I naively thought, oh, they forgot to put us in the stuff. And then I started to come across events and experiences that speak specifically to the intent of erasure. So a great example of that is Architect Magazine and AIA had a lecture at the AIA conference when it was in New York. And right there in the center of the stage is Justin Garrett Moore wearing that pink shirt, stunting on him, and having a wonderful 1-hour panel discussion. After the panel was done and they put it on the website, they've completely edited out Justin. From his intro to any of his answers, all of it completely gone. The only time you saw him is his profile shadow when they zoomed into one of the other speakers. And he reached out to the Architect Magazine to say what happened, and everybody was silent. And that was in 2019, 2018, right? So 2018, excuse me. So guess what happened in 2020? Then they dropped this article, The Accidental Erasure of Justin Garrett. Oh no. To Photoshop one curl out of a picture, how much time and how many layers that takes to do? You gonna tell me that it accidentally came out of a whole 1-hour panel discussion? Nah, it was a directive. Somebody told you, take him out. I don't know what he said or how he said it that invoked that directive, but it was. And so they're not being honest about that and being mindful that sometimes we're in spaces where we contribute to things that we're being pulled out of. And then my favorite part of that story is then in Architects magazine, the May 2020 issue, they had an interview with 4 people. But when it went to print and the illustrator did their thing, who fell off the table and off the page? The Black man, Stephen Gray, all of a sudden was not part of this discussion again. And so when this got flagged as another moment where Architect magazine was purging and erasing us, they were able to update the digital article to have the actual photograph. But if you have the physical, tangible May 2020 magazine, you'll see the illustration on the right-hand side here. So I say all this to say, you have to understand that it's not just enough that we're putting ourselves out there, but also understand that people are fighting against that. And everyone has to make sure that we're getting the credit for our participation, our presence, and our impact. Okay, almost there, guys. I know. I did 36 minutes so far. You with me still? So there is 115,000 licensed architects in the United States. 2% are African-American, and the numbers are growing, and we're excited for them. And so part of what we talked about before is that I'm the 315th living African-American woman architect in the United States, the 21st to become a fellow, the 2nd in all of New York. Shout outs to Roberta Washington. The 2 of us are holding it down. And the president and being a woman president of NOMA was important to kind of showcase, because even though it's an organization that's pushing for diversity, there's clearly spaces and places that we can also continue to improve in that space. So just owning that and also being intentional about making sure that our pipeline of leadership also starts to address that is also quite critical. I try to be as visible to my community as possible, participating in parades. I participate in protests. It's important that we challenge one another to be better. We don't have to all be yes people. Like, it's fine to say, nah, this part is not cool. Let's fix this, and let's fix this correctly and correctly. I make room for our experiences. Those are the 2 panel discussions that I had put forward at the AIA that got rejected. And it went great conversation. And I met so many incredible people. We also have the J. Max Bond lecture series that we do in collaboration with the Center for Architecture every year. And that was also a really important way of continuing his legacy and making sure that people continue to learn about who he is and his impact. I protect our history. Yes, I find the time to mark up articles and to make sure that they say things correctly and accurately. You know, Roberta Washington and Heather O'Neill are 2 different people, can't use that interchangeably. And just seeing how terrible they are, and then also making sure to make a point to put them on blast for their errors. And not just to yell at people for the sake of yelling, although quite fun, but also creating and establishing relationships and MOUs with these organizations to then now tap NOMA's historian to provide content, not just for Black History Month in February or Women's Month in March or whatever, like all year round. You can feature us all throughout the whole year. There's plenty of content. So then I also launched the Say It With Me, Say It With Media campaign, where it was beyond just me pushing for media publications to talk about us, but asking them to take a pledge that pushes for 4 things. The first thing is to report the number of diverse designers that they feature in their publication, and to commit to increasing it by 5% every year until a 15% is reached. The next is to create content that literally describe us as great. Google said they don't call us great, call us great. And if you don't use the G word, sure, fabulous, amazing, whatever words you use to describe our white male counterparts, use the same energy and vibe describing women and people of color, and we'll be all right. Also, I was very frustrated using social media to find out about historical information and content. So you all as publications have the ability to use your research team to find and unearth that really important stories and bring them forward. And then lastly, to talk about how architecture itself has been used to harm and how we can move it forward. So what you're seeing on your screen there are the 9 publications that have taken on the pledge, which also is publications that are interested in hearing about our stories and about our work. And collectively, they represent 6.3 million monthly impressions. So when you finish a job, when you finish a project, when you finish these things, send them your stuff. Tell them, hey, this is me being great. And then make sure you call me great when you write the article about me. And so to move that forward, I met with almost every publication editor and so on and so forth. And I made the pitch. But if you want to help me out, you can go on the website on that Say It With Media page, copy and paste the text. And if you tap any one of these images, it tells you it auto fills an email for you with the editor's contact information. I'm spicy. Anywho, and then you could tell them, please sign this pledge. I am a subscriber, or I would be if you did, and continue to push the power of kind of influence and making sure that some of these platforms, especially things like Arc Daily and Dezeen that has such a big reach, that they commit to tracking and publishing and seeking out content that elevates women and people of color. All right, architecture as advocate. You still with me? Y'all feel okay? All right, good. So now how architecture can do extraordinary things. Now I know you all are experts in this, but I also want to take a moment to talk about how architecture can be used to oppress. And part of my examples that I like to bring forward is Robert Moses, who I thought was this amazing person who'd do all these great things, come to find out that he was a racist. And he did not just not like people of color, but just immigrants. So if you weren't born here, you weren't really welcome. And so he, when developing Jones Beach, understood that our main mode of transportation was mass transit and buses. And so he mandated that the overpass bridges over the Southern State Parkway was 9 feet or shorter, which means that our buses couldn't pass. So these 20 plus overpasses are the physical manifestations of his racist ideals, right? And so sometimes it's blatant and obvious, and sometimes it's different, it's subtle. But please know that the architecture itself, brick and mortar, has been used to harm. So now, my architects and designers in the room, how can you make sure that your future creations are healing and repairing the harm that this architecture has done? You have development that has market rate housing entrances versus affordable housing entrances, which to me is the equivalent of coloreds only and whites only entrances, because your pro forma wouldn't have ever calculated out if you didn't include the money that you get for having affordable housing. So how dare you have us come in a different location? You have gentrification, you have redlining, all sorts of ways where architecture can be used as a weapon. And then we have projects that I find to be really important for us to understand. One of them is the National Memorial for Peace and Justice, which I affectionately call the Lynching Museum. And a lot of people were very upset by pieces of metal hanging from the ceiling. And my critique and my response to them is, if you are this upset about materials hanging from the ceiling, I need you to bring the same vibes and the same energy when Black and brown bodies are also being murdered in the streets. And I give examples like George Floyd, and I said, it's not the same. I was like, technically, it's the same. But if you need a more specific example, we can talk about in 2017, a kid in New Hampshire who was 7 or 8 years old, by a series of high school kids, put a noose around his neck and hung him on a tree in front of his sister. And luckily for us, their noose tying game wasn't so strong, so it unraveled and he fell. And I remember watching the news and seeing this like chocolate baby's neck with rope burns, and with the over voice of the sheriff saying, we're not going to press any charges because these are good kids. And so again, we have to be clear that the ways that people are being tortured and murdered are continuing. So this is an opportunity, an example of how architecture is keeping that history, that's inscribing those names and those dates and making sure people are aware that it's not past histories, but actually present, current events. Then there's the National Museum for African American History and Culture. This is a 100-year-old advocacy effort. Back in 1916 is when they first asked for this museum on the mall, and they were told African Americans had not significantly contributed to society to warrant a museum on the mall. So it took 100 years to make this happen. So not only is it the testimony of our participation, it becomes a safe place for us to send our artifacts and the importance of our culture in a place that it could be preserved and potentially one day be put on display. So architecture is the long game. Next, NYCOBA did a great job. Some of the members of NYCOBA did a great job to have West 162nd Street renamed J. Max Bond Jr. Way. Again, a way of keeping our heroes embedded into our built environment, where people will look up that name and say, "Oh, I wonder what that person did," and continue to find. So in your cities and states and communities, find ways of elevating and memorializing the contributions of us in the built environment. The African Burial Ground National Monument. This was the very first project that I ever worked on as an intern. I was actually a student at Pratt at the time, which was powerful and dope. They found 419 remains while excavating to build a federal building. and they had to stop excavations so that Howard University can do some reporting. And what was interesting is that it was a whistleblower that kind of halted the stopping of the construction. So 419 is what they were able to capture, but or one might assume that other remains were there before then. And what was also powerful in working with historians is that they talked about the full extent of the burial ground in downtown Manhattan and an estimated 20,000 remains in this area and over 500 artifacts on our site. And so the building to our north, the building to the west, the city hall that we all get married at, all of that is literally built on the backs of our ancestors' bones. And so I like to be spicy sometimes and would like to think while they were building those foundations, they also came upon our remains and continued to build anyway. So I really respect and identify the importance of architecture to keep that history, to make it a place of memorial. And what you're seeing in the landscape, those mounds are those 419 reinterred, not buried where you forget that they're there, but very much present in the way that they're there so that you understand that this is not a place to chill, but actually a place to remember and give respect. 888 Boylston was my project, one of my projects in Boston. It is the highest speculative office building in all of New England, pushing for LEED Platinum. This is where really when I push for environmental justice and making sure that our architecture and the projects that we build, the materials that we're building and how it performs is also equally important to how stunning and gorgeous it looks. Bronx Point, this is a 542 affordable housing project in the Bronx. It also has the first ever brick and mortar hip hop museum ever. What? So I'm really proud that we actually just opened it late last year. And so it's now officially the homes to so many residents, and it was designed in a way that really centered around community engagement, and that was part of the efforts that I was a part of. So again, saying that these projects that we're developing are ones that hold the culture and identity of the people in the way that we manifest and design the projects. And then one of my favorites is the Cleveland Foundation headquarters. I know it's a really small plan, my bad, but you see all those yellow spaces are actually public spaces. So this client actually built a building that was 40% bigger than they needed so that they can actually fund the spaces that the community needed. And then I would fly to Cleveland multiple times to have community engagement meetings to find out what are the spaces and uses that they actually needed and design the building accordingly. So even if the headquarters is closed on the weekends or late at night, the public spaces are actually there and available for the community to use all the time. And I just thought it was so powerful to have a client that actually was an advocate, and then how that collaborated through architecture was also a really cool model. So I say all that to say it's not just us always fighting, that you also will find like-minded consultants, colleagues, and clients that are also moving to move the mission forward. And so what is my goal here in this space? I want to replace monuments and spaces that are oppressive with those of our great leaders in community spaces. And one of my favorite examples of that is in New Orleans, where there used to be a Robert Lee statue that was taken down and replaced with a Mardi Gras costume that says "The people are king." So like, how dope is it to have a space, the pinnacle of a city, where there used to be a figure that fought vehemently to maintain slavery, be removed as this reminder that your freedom is temporary, be grateful for what you have, and replace where you're heralding and elevating people and community instead. People used to chuckle at my little animation before, but then post 2020, y'all started to get it. All right, last section, last chapter, I promise. Y'all are still holding it down. I'm excited, nobody's napping, so we're doing good so far. Architects as activists. So here I wanted to just shout out and highlight different architects and designers in the ways that they're changing the profession as well. If exhibitions and public speaking ain't for you, I get it. But here are some other dope people, what they're doing. The first is Beverly Willis Architecture Foundation. Her exhibitions, Built by Women, is actually what inspired the Say It Loud exhibitions. Walking through that gallery and saying, oh my gosh, I walk in that building, I know that building, and she's, oh my. So while I was there, I asked the executive director, hey, if you'll do an exhibition about women, would you do one about diverse professionals? And they said, absolutely. So she is my first shiro, if you will, in terms of sharing her story. And one of the things that I want to quickly share about her is that when she was an architect and had her own practice, when it was time for her to retire, she went to all of her developer clients and asked them to take a pledge that they wouldn't hire any architecture firms that didn't have women as partner and principal level. And a lot of those developers and clients already had diverse leadership, and so they approved. And so there was a lot of firms for a block of time that was not able to get repeated work or extended contracts with clients that they were used to getting because they did not have any women in those leadership levels. And so what did those firms do? They looked in their staff and not just put people in the seat, because once you partner principal, you have equity, you have ownership, you have power. So they started to mentor and develop those talents. And so now we're seeing way more women, not as much as we want, but way more women that there was at the beginning. So I thought she was kind of brilliant because she leveraged the client to move her agenda forward. And I'm trying to figure out how I can do a Beverly Willis, but one step at a time there. The next is Robert Nichols. He started the World Deaf Architecture program. And he's really talking about how do we make both the built environment and the profession more equitable for those with disabilities. Sometimes people say, hey, Pascale, how come you're not fighting for this group or that group? And I'm like, well, I don't really identify and or know truly some of those challenges, but I'm down to find the other collaborators who are doing this great work and supporting them. So if this is something that resonates with your soul and with your heart, please support Robert Nichols for this organization that he started back in '93. I also, besides being president of NOMA and all those other things, I also participated as AIA New York Board of Directors for a bit of time. And I do these things not just because I like lots of titles behind my name, although that is quite fun. I like being in a position of power where I'm able to help put policy forward. There's a difference between being an activist and an advocate. And for me, an advocate is a long game, right? You're there for a while and creating those policies. So by sitting on the board in September of 2020, we were able to put out a statement, a criminal justice facility statement, really encouraging our members to step away from designing and building jails, prisons, and places of detention, and leading into the creations of new typologies and spaces that actually heal. And I show all the beautiful names and faces down there because you need to know that it's never going to just be you being able to move these things, but having an influence and being in the room with those that can actually move those things forward. So being a great architect is not just about the buildings we're creating, but actually the opportunities that we're creating for others in that way. Project Pipeline, we talked about this earlier. This is the kids camp that I was telling you about, where all these kids walk around, sketches, and create their communities. So these are some pictures of our Project Pipeline camps. We've serviced over 20,000 kids since it started in 2012. And we're really just proud of the progress, and now that it's a global initiative that's happening all over the world. We have Tiffany Brown with the 400 Forward. She was working on getting the next 400 licensed African-American women architects. What I wanted to share about this one is what she does is she mentors about 5 girls a year, where she writes their recommendation letters. She takes them to lectures, construction sites, newly constructed projects. So her thing is not about like, I need to, solve it all with 1,000 kids, but really meaningful relationships with girls and really showing them the profession. And maybe some of them go, yeah, it's not for me, but we gave it a real good try and really exposed them to it so that they know what it's about. And then Brian Lee Jr., who is actually my president-elect, so he'll be following me in the presidential term. But what I loved about his process is called Design as Protest. So dope. And the acronym is DAP. So good. Anywho, what his whole thing is, architects has these skill sets that's beyond drawing buildings. We actually are critical thinkers, problem solvers, synthesizers of complex information. So now how do we leverage that? So he would go and participate in community meetings, bring architects with them. And as they talked about teen pregnancy or drug use or what are the challenges, we leverage those different skill sets in those spaces. And then he was able to do them globally, virtually as well. And so it's a really powerful and important introduction to the community also to understand how we can be relevant into solving some of society's issues. And then Mike Ford, the hip hop architect, hip hop architecture camp. He's definitely the big celebrity out of all of us. And what he does is that he takes lyrics of hip hop songs that talk about architecture, and he has those kids extrude them based off of the rhyme scheme or the cadence about the lyrics. And then they create these beautiful cities based off of that. And while they're learning about conceptual thinking and processing, like how an Eminem set of lyrics is going to be very different from a Lauryn Hill, so they're getting the nuance and a different way of even reading music in that capacity, partnering with software companies to give free software. But then he has the kids partner with a local celebrity musician, and they write a song that talks about how they're going to use architecture to help their community. So every place that he has a music video. It's so dope. Bronx is also pretty cool. Just saying. But there's a really great series there. So I say all that to say he has both in-person and virtual hip hop architecture camps. So please participate as a volunteer and get the word out as well. And lastly, for me, I'm also pushing a See It Loud augmented reality app and camp, leveraging all this 1,112 amazing content that I've gathered. creating something like a Pokemon Go, if you will, that when you get close, it tells you that you're near a building designed by a woman or person of color. It shows you the headshot and the name of that person, as well as marching ants around the perimeter. You're actually able to create art, snap a picture, and actually see it on the building at 1-to-1 scale. We're working with a Polish app developer called NOMA and trying to launch that over the next few years. And so that's another way of educating, empowering through augmented reality. So the Beyond the Built Environment programs that I've developed that some are more popular than others is the Say It Loud exhibitions that are geared for students and professionals. Hint, hint, nudge, nudge. The Learn Out Loud children's pop-up book that we talked about before, and then the See It Loud augmented reality app in camp, which is more for preteens and teens because they're more likely to have a device, although I've seen some really young kids with some cell phones, so I digress. National Organization of Minority Architects, which again, we affectionately call NOMA. We have our annual conference this year in Baltimore in October 23rd to the 27th. It's a big deal and it's gonna be amazing. It is also my last year as president, so I'm gonna give the most epic speech of all epic speeches. Just saying. And I would love, love, love to see you all represented there and participating in that space. So I'll leave you with my last and favorite quote. The ultimate measure of a man is not where he stands in the moments of comfort and convenience, but where he stands at the times of challenge and controversies. Many moons ago, I was asked to stand, and I've been standing up ever since, fighting for what's right. And I hope tonight you're inspired to stand with me. Thank you. 55 minutes. All right, I did my best to keep it under an hour. Sounds good.
Well, thank you so much. That was a very beautiful presentation. We're going to open the floor for questions right now, so I can pass around the mic for anyone that'd like to go first.
So a couple of things, but I want to start with something you mentioned a bit later about architects are kind of like the supervillains of the environment. How do you, or how do we as architects in a broader way, we frame ourselves to the communities that we're supposed to be serving? I know like individually in studio projects, we try to add an element of community engagement. So how do you sort of like, how does that transfer out of school into the profession and the working world? How do you do that?
Great question. Thank you. First, I will say we can be the supervillains, and just acknowledging that for some of the experiences of for others, that architecture and design isn't a great thing. So just understanding that it can be used as a tool to make an enhanced life, and in other places it doesn't. There are great firms out there that actually leverage community engagement as part of their entire design process, not just something that they do in the beginning, but throughout all design phases. And I think that's the beginning of how we make equitable spaces, is actually asking the community that's impacted by our work, what do they think, to have a real presence in the process. There's a firm out in New Orleans called Concordia. Yes. And what they do is, in part of their staffing plan and part of their fees is something called the community fellow, where it's a stipend and the monies that they put aside for the community member to get paid to participate in coming to their design reviews and trying to see the product evolve, which is saying few things. A, this person is of value, right? Your time is of value. We want you here regularly. And also telling the client this voice is important as part of the team. There will always be somebody at the table who's advocating for that. There's been businesses and companies that have developed now that are community engagement specialists that now have a more intrinsic kind of deep relationship with the community members and making sure that they're aware of some of the developments that are happening and ensuring that the product is responding to it. I know there was a School of Architecture class that was doing a project for an Indigenous community. And during the midterm review, they went to a reservation and they presented it to the community there. And after their presentation, the community leader was like, do you want like real feedback or like feedback? And people were like, oh no, we want real feedback. And they said, yeah, everything you all presented is very oppressive. Everything was right angles or sharp angles where we have much more natural organic shapes. And so this not broke a lot of the students, but a lot of the students were devastated because they had been designing with such great intention to design for this community. And they Googled the community and thought that they knew the community and say, oh, this is what you need. But in actuality, for them to truly understand was about engaging them directly. So most of those students actually had to throw out their project at midterm and actually start fresh and going back to the reservation and having deeper conversations about what they're trying to do with the project. And I think that's one of my favorite examples of what community engagement really is. It's not sitting there going, I'm pretty sure what that person needs is 6 bedrooms, 2 kitchens, and a bath. Well, ask me, do I need it, right? And I think once we keep having those conversations, we don't see the community as an obstructive group of people who's stopping us realize this important projects. It's actually the ability to reach design justice and beauty through architecture. Thank you for your question. Yes.
First, congratulations for your speech and the work you do. I think it was very inspiring, and also see how involved and how you have lived all this in first person. I had a curiosity, which I think is actually really appreciated. In your exhibition, you show the people as a very horizontal, I don't know how you would call it, really field or environment or community, and the project they do. I didn't see specific topics being brought forward or becoming the manifesto for this. I wonder, I'm sure you thought about it. So I wonder if you could share a bit with us how you curated and your decision behind really showing this in such a horizontal way.
I appreciate that. So fun fact, if you apply, you're pretty much getting into the exhibition. If I can make it work, we're making it happen. And the only criteria is being a woman or person of color, being from that community. And so what's important there is that I realized the quality of the work that was being submitted was spectacular. The only projects that I exclude from the exhibitions are jails, prisons, places of detention. I will not elevate that work. So if somebody submits that, I'll either refund them the money for their submission and or offer them to submit a brand new project in its space, because I'm very serious and committed to that criterion aspect. What's powerful by making it locally specific is that when people come in, they recognize a lot of the projects and then are able to then remember the faces of those. It also kind of demystifies this idea. Demystifies this idea of architects who are legends that have passed away decades and decades ago, and you can never ask them a question. Now you're like, oh, I know this architect. I can Google them. I can go to their lecture. I can go to their office. Architecture becomes just more tangible as an experience and a relationship. So really it's been about a plethora of scale and typologies that are featured in the exhibitions. However, to your point, in the book that I'm publishing, it took 3 years to get a publishing deal to make it happen and come to fruition. So many publishers was like, nobody would care about a book about this, or tell me who I can and cannot put in the book. And so at first, when I crafted the book, I tried to stuff as many people as I humanly possibly could in the pages. And somebody said, Pascale, stop living with this scarcity mentality. This is the life of abundance. This is your first book, not your only book. Just because the last time somebody published a book featuring the identity and work of people of color was in the 1990s with Jack Travis doesn't mean that it's not going to happen again. So I took a step back and I divided the book into 4 chapters, 4 typologies: residential, cultural, institutional, and master planning. And then I wrote the essays about how each of those typologies have been used to harm in the past, and then how the 10 projects that I curate per typology has healed. And so this book has 40 projects. And the next book will have another 40 for different typologies. But that's the moment where I kind of created a program through line that started to organize the thoughts in the way that those were curated in the book. Great question. Oh, stop it. More questions, please.
About the diversity in architecture and diversity in the architectural student body, the recent U.S. Supreme Court, one of the judgment that race cannot be used for the admission, which happened last 30 years, it was used, and a lot of minority took advantage of that to come to the school, college, and universities. What is your comment, and what program you will adopt in your activity to protest that kind of the highest body of the law or justice doing this kind of thing in the society?
I appreciate the question, and it's so timely. So it's a challenge, because by making these conversations illegal, it's actually started to present itself already. I was sharing earlier that some of my lectures in other universities have been canceled simply because the topic of what I want to talk about, and the schools are too afraid of having those discussions in fear of litigation. And what we're also seeing is a lot of our tenured professors of color also losing their tenure and or being terminated from schools because they gave a Black history course or something that speaks to that, even in the content of what they talk about. And when we talk about affirmative action as it relates to admissions, the group that was actually most leveraged to kind of get the most out of that was actually white women. And so it's a misunderstanding that Black students were who was leveraging these components. And so it's been quite scary to kind of find the evolution of a lot of the policies that we've put in place, because they've had to rectify some of the language to remove the explicit terms of Black or people of color or African Americans and just say, was it disenfranchised, not even minority really. Like there's been such an editing that is starting to move away from what we were trying to do in the first place. And so like we talked about before, advocacy is the long game and activism is about inspiring, kind of getting people activated and educated about what is the issue. And I think we need to continue to do both. So as president of NOMA, I just actually flew in from Ohio where I met with the LFRT, and that's the Large Firm Roundtable. That is a series of 60 plus firms that employ 70% of the profession globally. And so we started to talk about how that is starting to show up in their practice. And they talked about how certain people would send them threatening letters that they're going to report them to the Attorney General's office because they had scholarships specific for kids of color or a scholarship specific for women. And so even firms are starting to get threatened with financial support that they put out there based off of those things. And so I'm seeing the evolution of a lot of those processes that we're putting out there, but a consistency and a commitment to it. I saw this social media statement the other day that said, isn't it interesting how protesters 50 years ago was right, but the ones present day are wrong, right? And so we need to continue to protest, continue to push and advocate and finding spaces where we're welcome to have these conversations and to protect and fight for them whenever we can. Thank you so much for your question. Absolutely.
Your activism mostly actually around Black people. That's good. No, I know that there is another, but there is another group of people, Hispanic and Latino. They are more percentage of US population right now than the Black.
Mm-hmm.
So what is going to happen to them? Is there any, especially you do some program for them, or there's any other people doing that?
Sure. Thank you so much for your question. And it's a good point for clarification. I actually advocate for women and BIPOC designers. And BIPOC means Black, Indigenous, and people of color. And I show statistics about African Americans because it's the most depressing. I'm going to keep it 100, right? And a lot of the policies that we do for African American or Black people actually help address all those other communities that we're talking about. NOMA is the National Organization of Minority Architects. So a lot of the work that we're doing also is for minority groups and not just African Americans. The directory, which was started by Bradford C. Matt and Dennis Gran, that directory was specific for African Americans, but actually under NOMA, we're developing the other categories and tabs to continue to move that agenda forward. So I say all that to say is we've been collaborating with other organizations that also have that affinity in terms of those groups that are being represented. And when I advocate for people, I am advocating for BIPOC designers and women. And I might show the statistics as Black and I identify as Black. So I speak from that lens because it's the most authentic to who I am. But absolutely see that the challenges that we face are really systematic. And I talk about that, what's challenging women and what's challenging people of color might not be the same exact issues, but it's yielding similar results, right? Where we're 50-50 graduating out of schools, but 17% in leadership at firms, right? And that's not because of their skin color, it's because of the opportunities that they're getting. It's because that they sometimes have children. It's because of when they fall in love, like all these things that are being pushed against them, whereas people of color have a different set of challenges. So for me, I'm about eradicating all that injustice. All of it can go, and making sure that we're able to make a more diverse and more inclusive profession for everyone. Thank you for your question.
We have someone online has a question.
Sure.
Gunsay, do you want to ask your question?
Yes. Can you hear me?
Yes.
This will be a
Great.
live question.
So thank you very much for your inspiring talk and coming to talk to our school. I'm a faculty here. And I just had a question regarding the criminal justice facilities statement. which I think was a bold move, and it was, I guess, announced in 2020. I was curious to hear the extent to you can share the expected and also unexpected surprising responses to the statement.
That's a great question. Thank you so much for that. So that statement was a lot tougher when it began. And one of the most surprising pushbacks was actually the legal team, the AIA legal team, and saying that we were putting undue hardship on our chapter members than other chapter members. So part of the original draft had that you can't win certain design awards, you couldn't serve on the board, you couldn't do some things if you were designing and constructing jails and prisons and places of detention from that point forward. So if you had done it in the past, that's the past, but moving forward, if you continue to do that work. The other big surprise was that there was a justice committee, and the justice committee was a set of members that focused on jails, prisons, and places of detention projects. And so it was an interesting conversation about reframing what that justice committee could be and having conversations and panel discussions. And actually, they were so outraged by the statement that a lot of the members kind of stepped down from that committee, from those chair positions, which allowed for new leadership to come in and to kind of move the direction in which we're pushing for. And the number one criticism that I receive is, Pascale, you have to be at the seat at the table. If you're not at the table, then decisions are being made without you present. And my response to that has been, that is the equivalent of asking me to design a children's brothel. It's just wrong. There's no part of the table that I need to be at to have that conversation. There's no way to make it nice. It's not a good typology. It's the perpetuation of slavery through the built environment. And it is not effective. And it has been privatized where they push for 80% to 100% required occupancy, which means while we're drawing and signing and stamping, they have lobbyists going out and changing what used to be fines into minimum days in prison. So when we talk about the justice system, we as architects have a very active role in it. And we don't need to just show up when there's an RFP and an RFQ. We can actually show up when it's time to make policies and to fight against it. And then lastly, I'll say the thing that surprised me the most was EDC's doubling down on moving that the borough-based prisons and jails for New York. Their whole response to Rikers is that instead they'll have one in each borough, and the justice there is that you don't have to travel this far to see your loved one. And so there was a lot of fighting between us and kind of trying to challenge them to just think outside the box. And to this day, it's still something that we fight against. And that was actually what I was quoted in the New York Times, kind of talking against and really pushing against, and why I feel like it's to be authentic to not then have that represented in my library or in my publications or in my exhibitions. And so I guess to answer your question in a very long way is to say, I realized that my stance on the issue is not a popular one, but was happy to be in a room on a board with people who understood and also felt similarly. And we were able to find a compromise and find the language that was able to put it out there. And it is still something that I would like to execute under my NOMA presidency, is to have NOMA take a particular stance. But I want to make sure that it's reflective of what the NOMA membership wants and not just my personal agenda. And so what I've asked is that NOMA's communications teams put out a survey for the NOMA members to talk about where they are in the stance of this issue, so that I know how I can then best advocate as the president of the organization and moving that forward. And I know I spoke too long, and I know that was our last question. And I wanted to say thank you to everyone who stayed in the room and online. I appreciate it. And I'm here if you have additional questions.
Thank you guys so much for coming. That'll be the end of the event. Thank you.